The Jedi Order during the Clone Wars era was a shadow of its former self, burdened by hubris, tradition, and manipulation. At a time when the galaxy faced immense upheaval, the Jedi struggled to adapt to the challenges before them. Their perceived weakness stemmed from multiple factors, including their rigid adherence to outdated philosophies, the subtle yet devastating influence of their enemies, and the intrinsic limitations of their leadership and organization. One of the key reasons for the Jedi's weakness was their inability to evolve their philosophies to meet the changing needs of the galaxy. The Jedi Code, though noble in intention, had become a straitjacket that restricted the Order's ability to respond to moral and strategic challenges. Central to this was the Jedi's emphasis on detachment and suppression of emotions. While the intent behind these teachings was to prevent the corruption that often accompanied unbridled passion, it left the Jedi emotionally stunted and unable to fully empathize with the galaxy's citizens. This detachment alienated them from the people they were sworn to protect, creating a perception of the Jedi as distant, aloof, and out of touch. Moreover, their unwavering commitment to neutrality and pacifism rendered them ill-prepared for the realities of war. Though Jedi like Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker proved capable as military leaders, the broader Order lacked the mindset and training to lead a galaxy-wide conflict effectively. They viewed the Clone Wars as an aberration rather than as a situation requiring a fundamental reassessment of their role. This mindset not only hindered their strategic planning but also left them vulnerable to manipulation by figures such as Chancellor Palpatine, who exploited their internal contradictions to devastating effect. Palpatine's influence cannot be overstated when assessing the Jedi's weakness during this era. Through his alter ego, Darth Sidious, Palpatine orchestrated a grand deception that ensnared the Republic and the Jedi alike. By creating the Clone Wars, he forced the Jedi into a paradoxical role as both peacekeepers and generals. This dual role diluted their moral authority and stretched their resources thin. Furthermore, Palpatine's political maneuvering ensured that the Jedi's actions would be viewed with suspicion by both the Senate and the public. His manipulation of events, such as framing the Jedi as conspirators against the Republic, made it increasingly difficult for the Jedi to act without attracting further criticism or opposition. The Jedi's reliance on the Force, which had long been their greatest strength, was also compromised during this period. The dark side of the Force had grown strong due to the machinations of Sidious and his apprentice Count Dooku. This clouded the Jedi's ability to foresee events and weakened their connection to the Force. The Jedi Council, the governing body of the Order, spent much of the Clone Wars grappling with this blindness, often taking reactive rather than proactive measures. Their diminished foresight allowed Sidious to execute his plans with minimal interference, further eroding the Jedi's position in the galaxy. Another critical factor in the Jedi's decline was their centralization and over-reliance on Coruscant. By anchoring themselves to the Republic's political heart, the Jedi became enmeshed in the bureaucracy and corruption that plagued the Senate. This proximity to power made them seem complicit in the Republic's failings, even as they sought to uphold its ideals. Additionally, their centralization made them an easy target for Sidious. When the time came to enact Order 66, the clones' precise targeting of Jedi strongholds and key figures was facilitated by their predictable locations and routines. Internally, the Jedi suffered from a lack of unity and vision. While the Council sought to present a united front, there were significant ideological rifts within the Order. For instance, Qui-Gon Jinn's earlier rejection of the Council's authority highlighted the rigidity and dogmatism that had taken hold. This inflexibility discouraged innovation and stifled dissenting voices that might have helped the Jedi adapt to the challenges they faced. Additionally, individuals like Anakin Skywalker, whose potential and experiences marked him as a unique figure, were failed by the Order's inability to nurture him effectively. Instead, their rigid application of the Code alienated him, driving him into the arms of Sidious and ultimately contributing to the Order's downfall. Anakin's story is emblematic of the Jedi's broader failures. Though immensely powerful in the Force, he was plagued by internal conflicts that the Jedi were ill-equipped to address. Their insistence on suppressing attachments left Anakin torn between his love for Padme Amidala and his loyalty to the Jedi. Rather than providing guidance, the Order's response was to demand further suppression, which only deepened his sense of isolation. This emotional void was exploited by Sidious, who offered Anakin the promise of power and control as a means to protect those he loved. In failing Anakin, the Jedi failed themselves, as his turn to the dark side was the final blow to their already precarious position. Externally, the Jedi's reliance on the clone army was another glaring weakness. While the clones were effective soldiers, their very existence was a trap laid by Sidious. By depending on an army whose loyalty ultimately lay with their true creator, the Jedi unwittingly ensured their own destruction. The clones' programming to execute Order 66 rendered the Jedi powerless to resist when the command was given. This reliance on the clones also highlighted the Jedi's failure to cultivate broader alliances across the galaxy. While they had allies among the Republic's member worlds, the Jedi lacked a grassroots network of support. This isolation meant that when the Jedi fell, there was no significant outcry or effort to save them. The Jedi's estrangement from the common people was another factor in their decline. Once revered as protectors and peacekeepers, the Jedi were increasingly viewed with skepticism or outright hostility. Their involvement in the war, combined with Palpatine's propaganda, painted them as warmongers and elitists. This erosion of public trust left the Jedi vulnerable, as they lacked the moral and political capital to counter the narrative being spun against them. The Jedi Order's weaknesses during the Clone Wars extended beyond philosophical and strategic failings. They were glaringly evident in their combat capabilities as well. Despite being renowned as masterful warriors, their effectiveness in real combat scenarios revealed significant limitations, especially when facing enemies armed with lightsabers or those employing unconventional tactics. This weakness contrasted sharply with their competence against the mechanical armies of the Separatists, exposing a disturbing over-reliance on specific narrow skills. The Jedi excelled at cutting through ranks of battle droids. The simplicity of this task played to their strengths, allowing them to utilize their lightsabers and force abilities in straightforward, high-impact ways. Droids, while dangerous in overwhelming numbers, were predictable. They lacked creativity, emotion, and the adaptability that living foes brought to a fight. This predictability enabled Jedi to dominate in battles where their primary task was dismantling droid armies. Jedi like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker performed well in these engagements, earning reputations as war heroes. However, these accolades masked the truth. Against more skilled or resourceful opponents, the Jedi struggled significantly. One of the most striking examples of the Jedi's vulnerability was their inability to effectively counter other lightsaber-wielding combatants. In duels against Sith Lords or skilled dark side practitioners, many Jedi were woefully outmatched. This was not merely a matter of individual skill disparities, but a systemic failure in their training and combat philosophy. The Jedi Order's emphasis on non-lethality and restraint left them ill-prepared for the brutality of true combat. Their lightsaber forms, while elegant and disciplined, were designed with an emphasis on defense and disarmament rather than the kind of ruthless efficiency required to survive a duel to the death. This weakness became evident in the early days of the Clone Wars when Count Dooku, a former Jedi turned Sith Lord, engaged the Order directly. Dooku's mastery of Makashi, a form of lightsaber combat designed specifically for dueling, allowed him to easily outmaneuver and defeat Jedi opponents. In encounters like the one on Geonosis, where Dooku defeated both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker in succession, the disparity in skill was clear. While Dooku had the advantage of Sith training and years of refinement, the fact that two prominent Jedi, one of them the Chosen One, could be so soundly defeated highlighted a critical shortcoming in the Order's preparation for combat. Additionally, when Jedi encountered non-Sith combatants wielding lightsabers or similar weapons, they often fared no better. General Grievous, though not a Force user, exploited his mechanical enhancements and combat training to kill numerous Jedi. His unorthodox fighting style and lack of adherence to conventional lightsaber techniques rendered many Jedi unable to counter his attacks effectively. Grievous' success underscored how rigid and formulaic the Jedi's approach to combat had become. Their training relied heavily on facing droid armies or sparring within the confines of the Jedi Temple, leaving them unprepared for adversaries who operated outside these familiar parameters. Moreover, the Jedi's reliance on their lightsabers as their primary means of combat created additional vulnerabilities. While lightsabers were formidable weapons, They required precision, focus, and proximity to be effective. In battles where the enemy employed ranged tactics, explosives, or guerrilla strategies, Jedi often found themselves at a disadvantage. Their Force abilities, while useful for defense or evasion, could not always compensate for the sheer chaos of war. Against opponents like the Mandalorians, who were skilled in anti-Jedi combat techniques, or bounty hunters equipped with countermeasures like flamethrowers and cortosis weapons, the Jedi frequently struggled to maintain their combat superiority. This limitation was further compounded by the Jedi's inability to adapt to changing combat scenarios. Their reliance on the Force, while a source of great power, also made them vulnerable when the Force was obscured or disrupted. During the Clone Wars, the dark side's growing influence, orchestrated by Darth Sidious, significantly weakened the Jedi's connection to the Force. This diminished their ability to sense danger, anticipate attacks, or react with their usual precision. As a result, even skilled Jedi could be caught off guard, as demonstrated in several key battles where ambushes or surprise attacks proved devastating. The Clone Wars also exposed how poorly the Jedi adapted to unconventional threats. While they were adept at leading clone troopers and coordinating large-scale assaults against droid armies, they were less effective in situations that required asymmetrical or guerrilla warfare strategies. Enemies like Asajj Ventress, a dark side assassin trained by Count Dooku, exploited the Jedi's rigidity by using stealth, cunning, and deception. Ventress repeatedly bested or escaped Jedi who should have been capable of capturing her, highlighting how poorly the Order adapted to foes who refused to fight on their terms. This stark contrast between the Jedi's proficiency in cutting down droids and their struggles against lightsaber-wielding or unconventional foes revealed a fundamental problem with their approach. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Jedi had become specialists in a narrow range of combat scenarios while neglecting broader, more versatile training. Their emphasis on avoiding aggression and their reliance on the Force as a crutch left them ill-equipped to handle situations where their traditional advantages were neutralized. Ironically, the Jedi's failure to recognize their own limitations contributed to their downfall. They underestimated their enemies, particularly the Sith, and overestimated their own abilities to navigate the complexities of war. This arrogance was apparent in their dismissal of warnings and signs that the dark side was growing in strength. Instead of reassessing their training and strategies, they doubled down on their existing methods, further entrenching their vulnerabilities. When Order 66 was executed, the Jedi's weaknesses were laid bare. Clone troopers, using standard military tactics and overwhelming numbers, were able to kill Jedi across the galaxy with shocking efficiency. While some Jedi managed to survive these attacks, the majority were caught off guard and overwhelmed. Their reliance on lightsaber combat and the Force proved futile against the sheer scale and coordination of the assault. The Jedi's inability to adapt, their overconfidence in their abilities, and their failure to anticipate the betrayal of their own troops ensured that they stood little chance of surviving this coup. In the end, the Jedi's narrow skill set, combined with their inflexible training and combat philosophy, made them poorly equipped to face the unique challenges of the Clone Wars era. Their excellence in destroying droids could not compensate for their glaring vulnerabilities against lightsaber duels, unconventional tactics, and overwhelming military force. These failings, exacerbated by the machinations of their enemies, ultimately sealed their fate as an order.